Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to Of Nature and Mind. I'm your host Jacob. I'm here with my co-host, the lovely Jackson Mandart.
It's good to be back. Hi guys. Episode 4 or 3.5, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, so on our last episode we talked a bit about Hawaii and the trip we took down there. Now we're going to continue that, but we're going to focus more on the issues that Hawaii is facing with tourism, land disputes, and just the dilution of their culture through commercialization, things like that. Now, the reason we're doing this is because while neither of us are personally affected by the struggles that are going on in Hawaii, when we visited, we loved it being there so much. Me and Jackson have always loved nature, and we want to see that Hawaii, its culture, and the natural environment is taken care of, and we want to do our small part and just bring some awareness to the issues that are going on there. So, that being said, Jackson's going to start off for us and just give us a little brief history of what's going on in Hawaii.
A lot of this is pretty surprising. Well, no, it's not. That is definitely the wrong word. You just don't know. You just never thought about it here. One, why would you? It's one of those things that gets washed out of any basic standardized history class, and also because, I don't know, Hawaii would seem like a small part of U.S. history, even though I imagine local Hawaiians probably don't like it being called a part of U.S. history. But before this podcast, I watched a few videos. I forgot the guy's name, but there's a really good video called How the U.S. was stolen, or How Hawaii was stolen by the U.S. That was a really interesting video. But essentially, aside from the indigenous people finding Hawaii and starting their own sort of monarchy, government, and, they started their own society, Americans and Europeans started visiting Hawaii in the 1700s, around there, and they would just go to visit. Some would go to spread religion. I believe a politician from Great Britain even gifted them their flag, and I think a part of it was now incorporated into their flag. And things were pretty fine and well, but eventually some of the Europeans who moved there started, having kids, starting families, and over time they kind of realized this could be profitable. Sugar was a huge resource in Hawaii, and they started wanting to have more control over the economy and the government. And as they sort of seeped into the nation, they wanted more government control, and they started trying to pass these little passive laws here and there to get more benefits towards them. And as fathers passed away and their sons took over, they sort of had this idea in their head that they wanted to sort of, continue on what they were doing. And over time and over generation after generation, Hawaii started becoming less and less of what it was, and it was becoming more affected by the Europeans and the Americans who moved there. And eventually, I believe in 1893, the queen at the time was overthrown by the United States, and it was taken over by Sanford Dole, and he didn't directly start it, but the Dole brand with the pineapples, right?
Yeah.
Everyone knows the brand. You've seen it. Mm-hmm. That comes directly from Sanford Dole, and many people will still, like activists in Hawaii, will still talk about how this is a sovereign nation occupied by the United States. It is not the 50th state. And when that happened, there wasn't much they could do about it. So it's, it's the United States. Not many countries can do anything about that. But one thing I found kind of interesting, also very sad, that the Hawaiian language was being banned across the country. Or not the country, the state, excuse me. Certain businesses had to do it in English. The history taught in schools was made to show that the United States came in and was received with welcome arms by the Hawaiians, which you could say slightly at first, hundreds of years ago, but the switch from being a sovereign state to the United States was definitely not received well. In 1921, I believe, there was a law called the Hawaiian Homelands Act. I'm going to get into that more later when we talk about sort of the current problems they face. In the 90s, Bill Clinton even apologized. Like, hey guys, we're so sorry. Have you seen the South Park episode about the oil spill? And you've got the leader of the oil company looking at the camera of BP Oil looking, we're so sorry. And it's a satire essentially showing a terrible man apologizing for terrible acts, and it means nothing. And it's a little weird. Imagine the US president's like, oh, sorry about this, and does nothing afterwards to help them. And when the US started taking over, as I said, language was being banned, land on sacred sites were being built on, and fun fact, there was this really small island you never hear of. You usually just think of the three main islands in Hawaii. During World War II, there was this one super small island that was used as sort of a test site of weapons and bombs, and nobody lives there anymore because it's dangerous. There's still like 70% of the bombs used there are still just left on the island, so nobody can really live there. That was one of the most shocking stats I heard of, or not stats, but pieces of information when researching this. Because you could just imagine, like, the Eastern Shore, like, right down by there by Virginia, nobody lives there anymore because we just bombed it. It's pretty awful. But yeah, over time, land of Hawaiians that was used, because that island was viewed I don't know if it was viewed as sacred, but it was viewed as something incredibly important to them, and that was, again, another example of land being taken by the United States. And that's sort of where we come to now, where tourism's taken over, their land's slowly being less Hawaiian, their culture's kind of slowly fading.
And I think that's a good segue to start talking about kind of a lot of the land disputes, which I think is one of the large issues that they have. During our trip, we mentioned that we visited Mauna Kea, which I remember seeing a sign when we were driving up. It just simply said, "Save Mauna Kea." And once we got back, I was able to, and I had internet connection again, I was able to do a bit more research into it. And essentially, the peaks of mountains in the Hawaiian culture and religion are sacred sites.
Yeah.
A lot of what the culture and religion has a lot of ties being polytheistic to spirits and gods, and basically these peaks, and Mauna Kea being the tallest one, is a very sacred site that is continually being industrialized by telescopes being put up there in observatories for the study of space, because it just so happens that Mauna Kea has an above average number of clear night skies and a very dry atmosphere that makes it very good conditions to set up observatories. There is a new one that is planned to be built called the TMT project, which is TMT stands for the 30-meter telescope, which is supposed to be one of the largest telescopes ever built, and it's supposed to go right on top of Mauna Kea. And there was a bunch of protests that was happening before COVID, so much so that like Jason Momoa, The Rock, and other famous people who have ties to Hawaii and the culture were showing up and protesting with the locals.
It's pretty big of them to show up.
Yeah. And even a couple of years ago before COVID, there was a protest where 30 elders, or just older Native Hawaiians, were blocking the road from construction vehicles going up, and they were all arrested. And out of the 30, I think 2 of them had the charges dropped, and the rest still haven't even had trials yet.
Like, are they in prison?
This is 3 years later. I don't know if they're in prison or just on bail, but 3 years later, and they still have not gotten their trials, and this is because they were trying to defend what they view as their land and their
Which it is their
sacred
land,
yeah.
It's their land.
And it's just a lot of these issues I've learned come from the fact that even though they're native to the island, they're the native Hawaiians, they are not recognized by the federal government as an indigenous tribe like a lot of other tribes around the United States. And so they don't get a lot of the same benefits, or they don't have as strong as a claim to the land as a lot of other tribes would get. So there's constant land disputes going on. Specifically, like my focus was on Mauna Kea, but you mentioned that Homestead Act, which I think you can go into a bit because that plays into the issues they're facing with land disputes.
So it's when you read it on the .gov, it's a lot of it's thorough policy. It's something the average person wouldn't want to dig through, but in layman's terms, you get rewarded if you are over 50% Native Hawaiian, and you get sort of, it's not like welfare, but it is government assistance in the form of land. And if you're above that 50%, there's supposed to be land for you that you can have. That's very affordable and other things. However, there's currently just under, there's round up, and there's about 30,000 on the wait list. And I'm not sure the people who even received the aid is even satisfied. And I was watching a video from Al Jazeera. Some woman has been on the wait list since 2002, and she's yet to receive anything. And then there was another woman they interviewed who is living with her son, and I think a grandmother might be there. Once the grandmother passes away, and I'm not sure if when the mother passes away, but that 50% goes away. Because over time, Native Hawaiian, obviously, especially when it's no longer just Native Hawaiians living there, is gonna go away because there's interracial couples, all that stuff. I believe the son is married to a white woman, or no, just not a Hawaiian woman. They didn't specify, but the son is not 50% Native Hawaiian. So the mother was like, when I die and when my mother dies, this aid is going to be gone. And another activist was talking about how they're not in the typical fashion of removing a people from a nation in the sense of deporting or killing, but there's just subtle loopholes like this where eventually that Native Hawaiian eligibility goes away and all these people are homeless and they have nowhere to live, and slowly they have no homes, and that's just a way of removing a people. I don't know if it was intended that way, but it's definitely what's going on.
That homeless crisis comes from pretty much a direct effect of tourism in Hawaii.
Yeah.
A lot of what I read was basically just describing how a lot of people will come to these resorts or it's, I think one of the best quotes I saw was that Hawaii has essentially turned into the world's 1%. It turned into like their little playground.
I saw this story while just searching through history of Hawaii of his name's Zuckerberg, right? Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta or Facebook. He tried to buy, I think it was close to like 700 acres in Hawaii, and when he realized, when he was trying to build on that property, that land was actually reserved to Native Hawaiians, like specific people. And he tried to sue the Hawaiians. And it's just so much, like you said, the 1% or
So horrible.
the 1%'s a typical word used for nowadays, especially with the elite wealthy people. But this is sort of a prime example of this guy as a multi-billionaire suing local Hawaiians for 700 acres of just a nice place to live. It's very egregious.
It's so just the value of a home versus what the medium income is. Like the median price of a single family home of what I saw is almost $1 million. It was, I believe, $992,500, while the median income for a household, that being like, if you take the mother and fathers and put it together, is $47,500.
It wouldn't be bad in some states in the U.S., but Hawaii is the number one most expensive place to live. So,
and that is directly affected homelessness. It is rated as the highest rate of homelessness per capita in the U.S. And that, I couldn't find an exact number, but that disproportionately affects Native Hawaiians.
I did find a statistic on it. I forget where it was from. The number is very high. I don't want to quote the number because I know we are just...
Can you give like a range?
We're not experts or anything, so I don't want to say any false info, but it was close to 40% of homeless people in Hawaii are the ethnicity/race, however they wanted to classify it, was of the Native Hawaiians. So close to half of any homeless person in Hawaii is
a Native Hawaiian.
Yeah. So the idea that it's affecting mainly the Native Hawaiians is likely true.
Mm-hmm. And it's beyond affecting their housing. It's also just affected their culture. Like, I didn't realize this, but most of their culture has been commercialized.
Oh, yeah.
To be just consumed by what the general populace would like. Yeah. Like, the leis that are always...
What, that you receive out the plane in the other islands?
Yeah, there's or at a luau, which luaus that are done at resorts aren't even made to be close to what a traditional Hawaiian luau would be.
So, do you know what a traditional one would look like?
I don't know what it would look like. I just know it is basically telling a story of like the history of Hawaiians versus...
So a delicate art form kind of thing.
Yeah, versus the ones at resorts are just kind of like shows of people dancing.
Yeah.
And like the leis that you always see are orchids, which those are not traditionally the flowers that would be used. Another such thing is that like in the luau's or like hula dancing, you always see girls depicted wearing long grass skirts. I didn't realize until I was doing this research that that's just made up. That is not what they would normally wear. They would essentially wear a very shorter version that is made from a very pliable bark and tree, and that would be sort of like a loincloth.
I saw this sort of. It wasn't humor, but it was sort of like when you see political satire. It's satire where you classify it as humor, but it's really making a sad statement. I saw this compilation of videos of how we might see Hawaiians, and it showed a clip of Mickey Mouse dancing with like the leis and there was the music, and then it showed like a Walmart in Hawaii, but the logo was not the typical one you'd see in the other 49 states. It was sort of Hawaiian themed, or it was showing just how much it's hyper commercialized. It's like what they did to Easter, even though that's not really bad. Nobody really cares, but you know what I mean? Like they take something meaning and they sort of just
dilute it, so that way it loses its meaning and they can just profit off of it.
Yeah, except the issue is in some cases it's not like Christmas. Everyone loves Christmas, but that was sort of common consensus that's our idea. Hawaiians are forcibly having their culture diminished by the day. It's not something that's they want even close to be applied to them.
And it gets even worse when you consider the fact that for them it becomes a hard decision because of like the Homestead Act and how they're becoming homeless and their culture is being diluted. Some of them see using that bastardization of their culture as a way for them to escape homelessness by using that to make money. Yeah. And also to avoid just the complete erasure of their culture. Like, that way it can kind of still live on in some way.
And one thing that probably isn't talked about enough is... I imagine it's like working a job you hate for money, but times 50 when it comes to sort of the negative impacts it would have on your happiness. Because let's say you're someone who's a very proud Hawaiian. I can't speak for them, but I imagine working one of those tourist jobs. I saw this one video. This one woman is now homeless. She used to work on the tour bus, and she described it being a really rough job, and it didn't make her feel proud of anything, but she needed it to
survive.
Yeah, so it would almost be, it's demeaning in a way.
Mm-hmm. And then another issue that tourism has faced or caused for Hawaii is just the destruction of the environment, which, going back to Hawaiians' culture, they have very close ties to the land that they are a part of, that they live on. Yeah. And then, again, we talked about Mauna Kea and other areas being sacred sites for Native Hawaiians and their culture and their beliefs, and that you have tourists showing up and basically disrespecting the land. Like, I think one of the worst things that I kept seeing was how land would get bought that already displaces Hawaiians, builds a resort that then a bunch of people come to, jacks up the cost of living because of these expensive resorts. People come and visit. They then treat Hawaii as their playground without actually trying to take care of the land that they are visiting. Just basically destroying the land because there's so many people visiting. Like, I think the stat I saw from 2019 was that there was 1.5 million people living in Hawaii.
It's probably getting worse.
Yes, it was getting worse every year. This was their highest year, and they had 10.5 tourists that year come to Hawaii, over like almost 10 times the amount of tourists to the people who live there. They come, destroy the land, litter and dirty beaches. I'm pretty sure you saw something called like the plastic beach.
It was pretty shocking. We went to the Big Island, which is a much nicer representation of I hoped Hawaii is, but I know when you go to the other islands, it's much more touristy. And on, I forget which one of the islands was called the Plastic Beach. It was deemed that, and apparently there's a few of them, which is appalling. I don't know how on earth this even happens, or because those beaches are beautiful in Hawaii. I don't know why you'd even want to. I'm probably being naive. It probably happens way more often than I think, but it was not even a beach. Like, the sand turned grayish, bottles everywhere. People are trying to help clean it up, but it looked like a dump, which is kind of heartbreaking because I don't know, people live there. I saw a personal account of some woman. If you go to YouTube and you type in what Native Hawaiians actually think of tourists, it was a pretty sweet woman, and she didn't seem to be too angry. I know some people are of the opinion, which I understand, I don't want any tourists. Please get off our island. But she was like, no, the way I see it is, you don't go into a guest's home and you open their fridge without asking. You don't go into a guest home and you just put your shoes on here. You don't. you say hello, how are you? Like you respect the host, because that's kind of what Hawaii's doing. They're hosting an island which they don't even want to host. It's like a host with a gun to their head. Like, hey, I'm being forced to serve you dinner. Can you at least ask me? Can I please have?
Can you say please and thank you?
Yeah, it's so messed up.
That was, I think, one of the largest things I read when I was reading accounts from Native Hawaiians, was that yes, there's a large portion at this point that just doesn't want any tourists.
Understandable.
But which is very understandable. And then there's the other half, which is like they're all right with it. They just think the tourists have to be educated and be respectful. You're not coming to the island to treat it as your play toy. Yeah. You're visiting a unique place in its culture, and you need to be respectful of that.
I hope that's, I think, I don't know if realistic's the right word to put with it, but, well, yeah, it would be, because there's never not going to be tourists in Hawaii anymore, so you have to come up with solutions that would, benefit the tourist, sadly, but that's just the way it is.
I have to say, while I'm sure the Native Hawaiians aren't exactly thrilled with their situation, and I was very sad to learn about all this, I was able to find some pretty good, that is going to be happening, I believe, starting this summer, this tourist season for Hawaii. Like, I found an article, it was made in December of 2021, basically about recent. Hawaii's tourism authority, and that first off, this is the first time that it is majority being ran by Native Hawaiians, and they're taking a stance on making Hawaii a sustainable destination versus just focusing on tourism and making money. They're making it educating people as they come in. Like, one of the things I saw was, like, for a lot of the popular attractions, they're going to start making where you have reservations.
Good.
There was
good.
So right here, Hanamua Bay Nature Preserve previously had like 3,000 people visiting it a day. Gross. And they're capping the entry at 720 visitors a day.
That's good.
They're going to start charging a fee of anywhere from $5 to $25. And before you're even allowed to enter the water, they're going to have you watch a 9-minute video.
Guilt trip you before you get in the pool and have fun.
Well, you kind of need it. Like, some people just don't understand how to take care of the environment. Because a large portion of that video is talking about sunscreen and how it can destroy coral reefs if you don't have, like, a eco-friendly sunscreen. And then it destroyed coral reefs, it then destroys the ecosystem, start losing fish, and it just degrades the environment.
Those are good ideas.
Yeah. They're also just closing the beach. They're the nature preserve 2 days a week. Just no one's allowed to go. Which, again,
they started doing that at other parks too.
I think that's a great idea, because we've seen just from COVID, when you eliminate the human influence from something, how much of nature returns and just kind of comes back, and how much it thrives. Other things they're doing is conservation fees just upon arrival. So, like, you know what the Galapagos Islands is?
Yeah.
Like, if you want to go visit there and take a ferry there, upon getting off the ferry, $100. I think was that you give them, that goes towards making sure the island, its ecosystem and wildlife is taken care of. So they're considering doing that.
This makes me happy.
And then eliminating the less commercialized versions of Hawaiian's culture. So, like I said about the hula skirts, going back to traditional garments that they wore during a luau. Doing it proper, not just a dance and show for the entertainment of what they believe that tourists want to see, but showing them what it actually is.
I mean, if tourists don't want to see it and they end up having less tourists, it's like a win-win.
And how I mentioned the leis are usually like plastic with orchids and stuff. one of the things I saw was they're going to start using local florists to make Les Ave locally grown flowers
Gotcha.
that they can start giving out, things like that. And I think one of the coolest things that I at least heard was they're going to partner with hotels, and that
What, the government?
Or the tourism authority for Hawaii.
Yeah. Okay.
That if you spend a day picking up trash or like helping plant trees and helping the environment, they will give you a free night stay.
I would totally do that.
Yeah,
I would do that anyways. Like if they said we'll give you like a permit to see Mauna Kea, because I think you should have a permit to go see that anyways. I don't know if that's already like that, and you just didn't mention it, but. If we went to, like, going back when we were in Hawaii, if you're like, Jacob's like, hey, we're going to spend this day cleaning up trash on a beach, I'd be like, okay.
I thought that was a great idea, because it's a way that you can get people who actually care about the environment, because I'm going to assume most people who are going to take the tourism authority up on that offer are people who care about the environment, so you're getting more people who are going to be more respectful to.
I mean, those are very good ideas that are. I think they're all going to work. It's not. There's none of them are a stretch. Mm-hmm. They're good ideas that aren't. I don't know. I think whatever Hawaiians want, like hypothetically. Sadly, I don't think they're ever going to get it. So things like this have to be done. Mm. You know, they're never going to get their island back. The same way
they had in the past.
Many countries like Crimea, annexed by Russia, many other countries are taken over by larger ones. They're not going to get it back. Hopefully, God forbid, there's not another world war started over a small country being taken over. Wink, wink. But things like this happen, and
it's sad.
I just feel bad because I'm born into the United States, and I'm very lucky to be born here because I'm in a nice situation. But it definitely it definitely dings my nationalism or any sort of like love I have for the United States, which isn't super high. I mean, it's not low either, but things like this are pretty gross.
It's pretty disgusting. How, again, this place, when we went to visit, didn't have any idea about any of this going on, and I think that's just an issue to also begin with. Most of this I figured out as we were basically there. Like I saw the sign when we were going to Mauna Kea saying Save Mauna Kea, and that's how I learned about it.
You just looked it up?
I was already there, and then I looked it up about the Save Mauna Kea movement. Or just like how Oahu is just so commercialized that it's just a bunch of hotels and resorts.
I saw video footage. I didn't know that it was almost like a city.
Yeah, it's just basically diminishing the natural landscape and beauty, which is what people want to go there to see in the first place most of the time. So it's just a very sad situation, and hopefully we can raise a bit of awareness of the issues that Hawaii is facing. And if you go to Hawaii or any place, just remember to respect the environment, the people, the culture.
Definitely participate in the cleaning idea with the tourism group.
Yeah.
Clean up a beach.
You should just always figure out wherever you're visiting. Remember to respect the place you're visiting, or it might not be there.
Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah.
You gotta take care of it.
Pretty much. You said it best.
Do you have any final thoughts?
I feel in a weird place because we went to Hawaii as tourists, and I loved it. It was probably my favorite trip I've ever been on. So it's sad to see that tourists aren't always welcome. I completely get it, and I just feel like I'm in a weird spot because there's people there are suffering and I'm not, and I'm just a bit sad that I can't go there, or like, I don't know. It's an awkward dynamic because we're sitting talking about Hawaii because we feel bad, but we're not actually living it. And there's nothing we can really do about that.
Like I said, I think one of the
hard.
little things we can do right now is by doing this episode and trying to help build awareness of what's going on and like the issues they face.
Definitely be respectful, support local Native Hawaiian businesses. Definitely don't litter. You shouldn't litter in general at all.
I don't get how that even happens.
Yeah.
Like, it's not hard. Pack your crap out that you take with you.
Yeah. There's not much else. Just be respectful. There's not much else you can really do.
All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning into this episode of Nature and Mind. You can always check us out on YouTube, our Instagram, TikTok, and we're on all your favorite platforms to listen: Spotify, Google, Apple.
Check out part 1 if you haven't seen it. That is a more upbeat episode of our experience in Hawaii. It's very fun.
Yep.
It's very fun.
Absolutely. Thank you guys.
Adios.